Pretty little thing. My 5-year-old daughter, Isabel, ran inside from the creek one morning. She was out of breath and covered in mud. I wanted to scold her for playing by the water. I wanted to get her cleaned, dressed, and drive for school before the bus came in 20 minutes. But before I could, she held up a piece of bone right in front of my eyes, with a cute smile prepared, and a sassy comment already in mind. Look whom I met, Daddy. He has a name. I call him Pretty Little Thing. By the size and shape, I could immediately tell that my daughter was holding one half of a human skull. I tried not to panic. That took superhuman strength in and of itself. I took the proper steps, to the best of my limited ability, and grabbed some paper towels. I slipped the skull gingerly from Izzy's hands and threw it into a plastic grocery bag. Then I called the cops. My daughter didn't like that. Izzy screamed and shouted over my apparent betrayal for the entirety of the next hour. Trauma and drama aside, I could not figure out the reason behind the tantrum. Isabel had always been a good kid. As a single parent, I thank God for that. My mother often referred to her as Daddy's little girl, and family friends often complimented me for having such a polite child. We never fought as badly as that day. And it was all over my handing over human remains to the police. Weird. Nevertheless, the authorities arrived and took the skull, with gratitude, within the hour. They promised to examine the origin and cause of death. A plainclothes detective took me aside during my daughter's interview. He tried to explain the situation calmly. These things happen, he said, more than you would think. There was no reason to be alarmed. Sometimes people's bodies don't pop up for decades. I thanked them and told the detective to contact me only if needed. That was for Izzy's sake. I did not want my 5 years to be forever traumatized by finding the remains of a human being in her backyard. And so she still went to school that day. I still went to work. I was prepared to write the entire situation off as some unfortunate coincidence. A rational explanation would soon be provided by the detectives. In a matter of days or weeks, we could chalk up the whole experience to some unknown cold case from the 50s, or something. Maybe we'd be on TV. That night, Isabel talked about pretty little things at the dinner table. She said she wished he could eat with us. She said she wished I never gave him away. I found those comments to be downright creepy, so I disciplined her by taking away television for the week. Izzy did not take the punishment well. She stomped her little feet upstairs with a pout and looked back, which made my heart drop an octave lower. I hated to do it. But something needed to curb that attitude. I went to bed that night with a guilty conscience about Izzy, worry from the skull, and growing anxiety about the approaching storm. The weatherman claimed it would be biblical. Schools and offices had already shut down for the following day. I fell asleep to the first raps of rain against our shutters. I woke sometime later to a particularly loud crack of thunder. It was late. The dim screen of my cell phone read well past 2 in the morning. Immediately, my mind drifted back towards my daughter, and the guilt of the last 24 hours rose to the surface once more. I had not even checked on her before bed. I had been so mad about the fight, and the skull, and the weird nickname. I neglected to even tuck her in. I convinced myself to get up and check. I battled the nightstand drawer for my glasses. As my feet found the cold wood floor, I heard a faint noise from the hallway, and I wondered if Izzy was feeling some of the same guilt. I waited for her to tumble into my room in a tiny little mess, with 1,000 little apologies, and a request to sleep in my bed. But the sound of footsteps moved slowly drifted away from my room and towards her door. I listened closely and began to notice that something about the steps was different. There was no carefree skip and usual dance around the creaky floorboards. I did not hear the muffled tone of her squeaky little slippers, or a whisper of Daddy through the door. Instead, I heard a scratching, slow dragging that lazed its way down my hallway. Then my daughter's bedroom door opened. The creaking of rusted hinges was unavoidable. Anyone ever attempting to be quiet in my house would ultimately meet their end at the door. A loud, obnoxious whiny filled the air. Then a cold, uncomfortably deep voice echoed behind it. Ah, pretty little thing. I had a few pretty little things like you once. The threat of another person inside the house kicked my butt into gear. I threw open my door and darted down the hallway, stubbing my toe on a loose board, and cursing along the way. Exasperated, I arrived at the end of the long hallway and pushed my way into my daughter's room in a boxer's stance. Ready to fight. Standing in front of me was one of the most disturbing scenes I've ever seen in my life. My daughter was awake. She stared at me with helplessly wide eyes as a figure sat perched over her bed. I gasped, and the thing turned to me slowly, allowing me a full view of its horrible disfigurement of a face in the shadows of the dark. It looked like a man, once, before something tore away half the features. A sickly pale smile played across half its face as the being leered in my direction. A hole peeked out from the back of its head. That's a pretty little thing you got there. Looks tasty too. How old is she now? I backed away a bit. I didn't know what to do. My cell phone and any weapons I kept for self-defense were back in the other room. And even then, I knew they wouldn't do any good. Panic washed over me like a cold wave. I shouted for Isabel to hide and got ready to fight for my daughter's life. Then Iz did something stupidly simple. She turned on the night light. Suddenly the room became awash in a bright blue glow that reached into every dark corner. I shielded my eyes from the strength for a second. When I opened them, the human skeleton sitting on my daughter's bed was gone. It just disappeared. Isabel and I slept in a hotel that night. And every night until I sold the damn place. Look, I know this sounds crazy. Most of you won't believe me. That's fine. I get it and don't blame you. Everyone has their crazy ghost encounter, and each sounds as unlikely as the last, so don't worry about it. But one detail did emerge, during my attempts to sell the house, that convinced me of the authenticity of our shared encounter. The police finally received a DNA match on the skull fragment. It belonged to John G. Blakey. He owned that particular plot of land in the 40s before it was developed. John developed quite a reputation in my home state. He unalived 10 young girls, all around the time of their 8th birthday. He disappeared when the police started to close in. His remains have never been found. Until now. I don't know what kind of creature attached itself to my daughter. I don't know why it called her pretty little thing. I can only imagine. But I do know one thing for sure. We are never going to that goddamn house again.